You are watching the Love and Money Show, and today I have a very special guest, Gary. Thank you for being on the show.
It's just a pleasure to be here, Shakira, and I want to really compliment you for the great work that you're doing and to help to bring visibility to various contents. Keep up the good work.
Thank you, Gary. So, Gary, I'd like to start out by asking you to tell us who you are and what do you do?
Well, what do I do? I want to begin with I'm a very simple person with very exceptional views on life. I focus a whole lot on high achievement. It's a lot of work to get there. A little bit about what I do. I represent two companies out of New York. Um, One is Pitch Deck 101. So if you go to pitchdeck101.org, there's a website there. And in that website, you will learn a whole lot about what we're doing. But just let me give you a brief in terms of what we do at Pitch Deck. We have recognized over many years that businesses struggle to access capital. And even when you access capital, you struggle to exit that debt portfolio. So a large part of what we do is working with rising stars in business to really help them to understand financial portfolios, meaning debt, equity, credit, creative financing, and hard money lending. Of course, once they understand the portfolio, they're in a much better position as trying to predetermine which financial instruments or which financial mix is best for them. Those are things we perhaps talk about later on. But along with that, we work with them to help them to access capital. We are partnering with a number of financial institutions out of New York. MB Capital is one of our financial partners. DV is another institution out of the US that we're partnering with, and there's so many others. On our portfolios, we have in excess of 100 financial institutions that we are able to help our clients to get access to. But of course, the access is for us the easy part. For most businesses, they access the capital, forgetting that there's a cost for the capital. And that cost can rack up very high depending on the cost of the capital. With the high inflation that is taking place today across the world, there seems to be a much higher price for capital. So what we do also is work with the client to help them to identify smart ways to mitigate that. And by debt mitigation, what do I mean? Debt has a cost. So debt mitigation allows you to reduce the debt life cycle, reduce the debt cost. And in doing these two things, you're able to own the equity in the asset much earlier. So if you're invested in real estate, you're able to reduce the interest cost. You're able to reduce the debt life cycle. You're able to own the debt. You're able to own your asset debt free much earlier. That gives you greater debt leverage or greater capital leverage. And with the leverage, you're now able to build wealth faster if you're on that journey to build wealth. So that's just one aspect of the business. We have the second business, which is 10X Branded and Marketing um, LLC. That is focuses twofold. That is looking at real estate, but it is also focusing a whole lot on helping businesses to build a strong brand. One of the things that we see is that very often you start a business, and that's an emotional decision. But starting a business from an emotional decision will only get you that far.
Mhm.
So when we come in, we help you to understand the fact that every business should have 4 points of impact. You want to have a game plan to impact your workforce, your target market, the public, and by extension, the business cash flow. So the 10X B&M LLC really help businesses to understand how to build a value proposition, how to build a business ecosystem to stand up better. That's the first part of it. We also work with the clients to help them to identify smarter ways to get visibility, to get reach, because visibility is not reach. You may be visible, but you're not reaching your ideal client. And from the reach, once you reach, we help you to make impact. You're not going to make impact unless you identify your target market and truly understand the psychographics of your target market. And once you make impact, it's to convert. Once you start to convert, there is where you stand a chance to cash flow maximize. Um, the last three step is how do you build confidence, trust, and credibility? So this is an entire business ecosystem that we look at from the 10X B&M LLC in terms of ensuring that businesses have that fighting chance to not only start, but to survive and strive. Because the facts are showing that 20% of businesses fail in the first year, 50% fail by year five, and only about 33% survive after the 10-year cycle. We have studied that, and based on our research, we have built out this. This is one of the thesis and ecosystem that we use in to really help businesses to be more successful.
Okay, that sounds good, Gary. So you
Mm.
help businesses access capital, debt mitigation, brand building, visibility, and credibility, like in a nutshell.
In a nutshell.
Gary, what is your background?
Um, my background, many years ago, I studied international business, and that's was studied at Cambridge University.
That's impressive.
Yeah, I studied project management. That was from American University. Um, I also study global financial markets, and that was from Rice University. Um, so what I've done is combine that entire body of knowledge with years of experience in business to be able to build out what I call our original thesis. Because a lot of what we do, we take away all the fluff from business systems and everything that we give to you in terms of our business processes. It's applicable to business and it's something that can be applied instantly to be able to help the business to achieve. So I have a strong business background. Of course, many years ago, the focus was to study law. I started some study in business law, but then I diverted into business. I leave the law for perhaps another life cycle.
Okay, I understand. Well, what you're doing is very impressive. Graduated from Cambridge University.
Um, well, thank you. Thank you. I mean, what we did is a lot of international studies from Cambridge. There's a lot of international programs that you can do, but these are very in-depth study. I reflect on writing those exams. You had multiple days of writing exams. And I could recall after the first days, I didn't have fingers because you had to write. You had to write. So after the first day, my finger was so sore and so numb. I had to, put it into warm water and pray that it sustained the next day of writing exams. So that for me was one of the most, tough exams that I've ever written. The other exams, because of computer and the digitization of those platforms, um, it didn't have so much pressure on my hand. Um, but that's just some of my reflection on doing the Cambridge program.
Okay. Hey, Gary, Can you explain your business a little bit more? Like, what is private equity?
Okay. Well, to draw a distinction, there's public equity and there's private equity. For example, if you have a business and you're taking the business public as an IPO, it means that you're attracting public investors into the business. So that's called now public equity. Private equity, it means that your business, you're appealing to private investors um, to help you to raise the much needed capital to grow and scale your business. And of course, in the private equity world, you have multiple type of private equity investors. You have the angel investors, and angel investors may come into your business pre-income, meaning that they may not depend heavily on the income, the previous income or historical financial data for the business. But because the business sounds solid, um, they know that you have a strong background in your particular field. They understand that the market has great potential. They may come alongside you and invest even before the business start to generate income. And let me give an example. The world has just come out of a global pandemic, and there was a massive search for a cure for COVID-19. You find that once you would have established yourself as a strong medical practitioner who have tremendous history and background in research and development, and you want to now capitalize on this to make probably some fast dollars. Um, because of your history, you find that private equity investors may put monies in your hands because that is a bankable project. The world is in search of, a cure, and you have the expertise based on your background. And once you come up with a cure, um, it can set the stage for all stakeholders to benefit significantly financially. So these are kind of, decisions that you find private equity investors make. On the other hand, you have um, not the angel investors, but you have the more private equity investor that looks at more at the business growth. So they're not going to take you at the start phase of the business. Once the business would have had some historical financial data, strong team established, has great growth potential, um, the private equity investor will now come in. The private equity investors, they are more risk averse as against the angel investors because, of course, they're not investing their money. Most of them, they're not investing their personal funds. They are raising funds from places like sovereign wealth funds, which is government funds um, from various institutions, insurance funds. They're raising funds from students' endowment. So because they're raising funds from all of these different places, they have a fiduciary and a financial responsibility to ensure that they're investing those funds in the most prudent way. So that's just to draw the distinction between uh, the different types of public investment, private equity investors, and public equity investment.
Okay, Gary, let me just make sure I got this correct. For a private equity investor. So if I was a private equity investor and you have a product or you have a product. And so me as a private equity investor, I am giving you money for this product for you
Yeah,
to create the product, and then I get some profits. Is that correct?
exactly. Yeah, you as a private individual, um, you are invested in private companies for a profit.
Okay.
All right. You're strictly private. You're not public. It's a private relationship between you, the investor, and the entrepreneur who needs the capital. You have that private understanding as against public. And public, there is more, uh, a lot of government restrictions. You have to be compliant in the US with the SEC, the Security Exchange Commission, and all of these things you have to be able to comply with when you're going to take public funds. At the private equity level, while there will be requirement for compliance with the Security Exchange Commission, there's some differences in terms of the level of compliance.
Okay, that makes sense. Um, Gary, in terms of your business, what are the qualifications that people need to access funding?
Well, that would ultimately depends on the business type and the financial type, and we can look at qualifications from different standpoint. Of course, if you're investing in a company and an individual, you want to be certain that they have the necessary acumens to represent the portfolio that they're putting to the public. So that might be one area of qualification. Looking at their performance and historical data, they may have a proven track record in business. So that may be another form of qualifications. But there are also a few other types of qualification that you need to look at. Once you would have get past that type of due diligence, every financial instruments that you're going to be applying for, it it has different pre-qualification criteria. Like for example, with debt capital, this is where you're going to the banks, and you're going to now ask in the banks or maybe a private equity investor also for debt capital. Debt financing operates different from credit financing. For example, debt capital again, because if you go to the bank, remember the bank is not lending you their money.
Right.
They're lending you the depositor's money. So they're going to do a lot of due diligence. They're going to want to be certain that you have a history, a good history in business. They would want to ensure that you understand the product. You are not necessarily a business startup, but the funding that the banks to find favor with your debt capital, they would definitely be looking for historical data, all right, among other things. So these are just some of the things that you find that debt instruments will require. Debt instruments is different in so many different perspectives also because this is what we call a collateralized and amortized loan, meaning that from the time you take a debt instrument, interest starts to accumulate immediately. And interest is not calculated on a daily or monthly basis. The interest is calculated on the entire year and immediately applied to that debt instrument.
I see.
So I've looked a little bit at the pre-qualifications and we look at a little bit at how the instrument works. It is different with credit financing, and the pre-qualification for credit financing is different. For example, in the US, if you once you have your SSN, which is your social security number, you have a fixed place of address, and you would have built up some degree of credit history, meaning that you have a FICO score and you're in good standing, meaning that your payment history is good, your utilization ratio, you have some degree of utilization. You have length of credit history, and these type of stuff. Um, Credit is perhaps the lowest hanging fruit when it comes to accessing financial instruments. This too is different. Instruments, so that's some of the pre-qualifications to access credit. This is different also because you're also able to access credit at 0% APR, meaning that you're able to access this financial instruments and possibly for 6, 12, or 18 months you have absolutely no interest to pay on that instrument.
Mhm.
Um, our financial partners, we help many clients to access these type of funding also. Along with this, if even that period would have been expired and you now have to pay interest on credit, interest on credit is calculated different than how it is calculated on debt financing. Interest on credit is a simple interest, meaning
Okay.
that interest is only accumulated on the outstanding balance.
Mhm.
So if you have, let us say, $1,000, $10,000 out, and let us suppose that the interest rate is 10%, that means that you would owe $1,000 by the due date. That 10% is an annual APR. So the that interest is not applied to the account for the entire year. Is only applied to the account on a monthly basis. So it's going to be 1,000 divided by 12, and that will give you the sum total of interest that you need to pay. So that's a different ratio in terms of how interest is actually calculated. So it really gives business owners a greater advantage in terms of how they leverage financial instruments back into their business. And that's just a tip of it, because if we talk in debt mitigation, there's so much more that can be said about this debt instrument. Because regardless of how high the APR is, once you understand key fundamentals of how credit instrument works, you can access credit financing at 50% APR and still pay 0% APR because you understand how the instrument works. You can never do this with debt financing.
Okay.
So those are some of the differences with them. But of course, each one of them has different pre-qualification. You have debt, equity, credit, creative financing, hard money lending, and each one of them has different pre-qualification to access it. So that's just a little bit on what that is. It may take me the rest of the day to go deep into all of that for you.
Okay. So you offer different kinds of financing, you're saying.
Um, we are partnering with multiple financial institutions.
Mhm.
We are the bridge between the client and the financial institution. We ourselves is not providing capital to the clients,
Okay.
but what we have working relationship with multiple financial institutions,
Okay.
and with that we are able to talk to financial institutions after we assess the client's need, put the clients in contact with the financial institution, sit with them at the table, negotiate on behalf of the client, and also represent um, the financial institution interests. Because we represent both sides, so as to ensure that there's a fair deal. One of the things that we are very concerned about is, as I said at the beginning, many businesses access capital and they struggle to exit the debt portfolio. Now, if they struggle to exit the debt portfolio, it means that they're hurting themselves because everything that you do in the US in terms of whether debt, equity, or credit, if you're delinquent, it shows up on your FICO or PAYDEX score. So that affects you. While that affects you, it also affects the financial institution because when you have bad debt, and they are taking monies from various sources to allocate to you, but it's bad debt. They cannot reach their debt obligation, their annual dividend yield obligations. So we tend to look at both sides of the fence and ensure that we provide the kind of support that ensure that all stakeholders are happy.
Okay, Gary, that makes sense. Can you tell us what is your favorite book or some book recommendations?
Um, One of the books that I really would have enjoyed a few years ago is Think and Grow Rich.
Okay.
Um, that's a beautiful book. Um, And I do believe that, Napoleon Hill and the great minds behind research, they put a lot into these content. Some of the other books that I would love to talk about is Robert Kiyosaki, Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
A lot of people say that
That's
one.
another. Uh,
A lot of people name that book.
yeah. Uh, I think it's a beautiful book. It really helps you to understand mindset. Some of my key takeaway from that book is that Robert Kiyosaki, dad, was an educator. He was the a dean of a university, and he was so educated, but yet so poor.
Mm.
You know, he had a friend who whose dad was extremely wealthy. He didn't have, half of the education that Robert Kiyosaki fathers had, but he was extremely wealthy. So that literally shaped Robert Kiyosaki perspective on life. He made a conscious decision that after he served as in the military, that he is going to study whatever he has to study to become financially independent. And of course, real estate is what it was. He was going through his struggle, his challenges. He was sleeping in his car. Um, but here is where he was able to leverage debt, credit instrument, because he didn't have the monies, but what he had is credit leverage. And because he had credit leverage, he was able to leverage that into purchasing his first real estate portfolio. And from then he never turned back. So those are good stories to read. And of course, I'm going to be a little biased here also. I'm also an author.
Okay.
I have a number of books. One of my last books is 10X Branded and Marketing Blueprint. I love that book because it really gives you a step-by-step approach in terms of building a strong brand. Um, I read my book several times over again, which is The Psychology of Money. And I truly enjoyed it because, money is a whole lot about mindset. You really have to, take the time to really understand money and how money works. And I think this is something that a lot of people struggle with, you know. People need to understand the difference between what is fiat currency and what is money. People need to understand money has an assets and money has a liability. Fiat currency is a depreciating asset. And one of the biggest mistakes that I see people do, people believe that when you save money, you're able to make money. But I would say to people, when you have a savings account, you have a savings account for three main reasons. One is for safekeeping. You know that once your money in the bank account, it is safe. No fire or theft can go to it. It's there for emergency. If you need money, you can go immediately, you can access it. And the third one is for investment. And that's the one most people don't know, don't do about, don't really invest. People do not understand what is safe investment portfolios, how to invest in stocks, bonds, and mutual funds and hedge funds, how to invest in REIT. Um, Enough information perhaps is not there. You find that if people make a choice to invest in these portfolios, they are making front-end analytics. And if it's front-end analytics, it's emotional. I'd strongly advise against emotional investment decision. You want to do back-end analytics. Because the back end really enables you to really understand what is the mindset behind how organization functions. And once you understand the the corporate culture, it helps you to make better investment decisions. So there's a whole lot that we can talk about when it comes to that, but people need to really understand how to save investment portfolios and really how to, along with the work that you're doing, how to ensure that you have secondary sources of income or multiple secondary sources of income, perhaps that are passive income cash flows.
Okay, Gary. Very, very good. Now I have three questions I want to squeeze in if you could answer real quickly, your favorite place to travel, your favorite food, and then I'm gonna save the last one. Your favorite place to travel, your favorite food, real quickly.
Okay. Um, I love being um in the US. I love being in the Caribbean. But let me talk a little bit about US because I'm a foreign national. My mother and father, they are American citizens. My sister
Gary,
and so they are American citizens.
you're gonna get cut
But
off.
I'm a foreign. Huh?
One word, your favorite place to travel and your favorite food.
Oh, US. I love the United States. My favorite food is roti and curry.
Curry, I never had that before. Okay, I got to get out and experience the world. Okay, Gary, real quickly, I'm gonna switch over to love because it's a love and money show. Are you single or married?
I'm happily married.
Okay, can you tell us one thing? I like how you said happily because you don't see that a lot. But can you tell us one thing that you learned about love as it pertains to money that could help someone else?
Can you repeat that question?
One thing you learned about love when it comes to money that could help somebody else.
Oh yeah. I do believe that is you need to be certain that you fall in love with the right person. And if you fall in love with the wrong person, even love can be a liability. Even love can be a liability.
Okay,
You want to be,
Gary, I'm sorry. One thing you learned about money as it pertains to love.
Mhm.
I think I switched it around. One thing you learned about money.
One thing I learned about money has it what relates to love.
One thing you learned, yeah, one thing you learned about money.
I don't know how to answer that question.
I know you know I get
You got me
you know
there.
what?
You
I'm gonna
got
get it.
me there.
I'm gonna
I
get it
don't
from
know
you.
how to answer that question.
I'm gonna get it
Huh?
from you later. I'm gonna get it from you later, and then I'm gonna broadcast it. No, I'm just kidding. Gary, I'm just kidding. Okay, Gary, we only got like 2 minutes. Where can people find you if they want to reach out to you?
Okay. One, you can find me at pitchdeck101.org. That's the website. You can also find me on YouTube, which is Global Capital Inc. That's another company that we have, Global Capital Inc. If you just Google Global Capital Inc., the YouTube channel will come up. You will see a lot of the contents that we are doing there. And so between pitchdeck101.org and Global Capital Inc. are the two social media platforms. Now, let me say this. Once you get to the website, um, pitchdeck101.org, and you come to the bottom, all of the social media platforms will show up there.
Okay, Gary. Um, well, it sounds good, Gary. Did you have any last words to leave for the audience?
Well, what I want to say, I want to encourage more people to like and follow you, because you're doing an excellent job in terms of not only helping businesses to be visible in front of your audience, but you're also providing your audience with important information that can literally transform their lives in business.